Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Thursday, October 22nd. The Office of the Prime Minister addressing reports circulating on social media that Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis has tested positive for COVID-19. OPM says the Prime Minister has not tested positive for the virus and remains in self-quarantine following exposure to the virus. It adds that the Prime Minister continues to carry out his duties from self-quarantine and is following all recommended health protocols. The Prime Minister is currently not experiencing symptoms and is being monitored closely by the Ministry of Health Surveillance Unit. Prime Minister Minnis has received 4 negative COVID-19 test results to date. Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis and cabinet ministers are in quarantine for the second time in 2 weeks after Minister of Public Works Desmond Bannister tested positive for COVID-19. Cabinet Office making the announcement last evening in a statement. Minister Bannister is currently in quarantine, and as a precautionary measure, all who came into contact with the minister will self-quarantine. Cabinet ministers, and that includes the Prime Minister and staff at the Cabinet Office. The Prime Minister and cabinet ministers will work from home and continue to be fully engaged in their ministries for the duration of the quarantine period. Now, while Minister Bannister did not attend yesterday's session of the House of Assembly, other cabinet ministers who would have came into contact with him at Tuesday's cabinet meeting were still in the House of Assembly. Contact tracing is being carried out by the Ministry of Health Surveillance Unit, and all established health protocols are being followed. Minister Bannister is the second cabinet minister to test positive for the virus, as earlier this month, Environment and Housing Minister Ramal Ferreira tested positive for coronavirus. Minister Bannister's infection follows that of the opposition leader Philip Davis, Central and South Eleuthera MP Hank Johnson, St. Barnabas MP Shanadon Cartwright, and opposition Senator Dr. Michael Darville, who all tested positive for the virus in the past few months. There's 4 current initiatives being put in place to assist small island states who are a part of CARICOM during these trying times, says Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro. Mr. Almagro spoke by way of a translator this morning during a webinar concluding the 50th OAS General Assembly.
We have 4 current initiatives. One focused on energy security, food security, safe tourism, and the 4th one that is a development fund for the Caribbean. Those 4 initiatives are being worked on within the institution and corresponding contributors, international organizations, donor countries, financial entities, and of course the governments of these countries.
Mr. Almagro contends that the initiatives will put its finger on the vulnerabilities of the small island nations and how to face their most urgent needs. It also is meant to aid in their development. Just yesterday, our country's own Minister of Foreign Affairs, Darren Henfield, was elected as the president of the 50th regular session of the OAS General Assembly. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the assembly was held virtually for the first time to uphold the social distancing measures adopted across the world. Minister Henfield urged all members of the OAS to work in a strategic partnership during these critical times. Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis yesterday announced that his government will significantly increase funding to the Small Business Development Center, embracing a key recommendation of the National Economic Recovery Committee, co-chaired by Acting Financial Secretary Marlon Johnson and Providence Advisor CEO Kenwood Kerr.
My government will provide $250 million to payment businesses over 5 years. $1 million. Mr. Speaker, that is $50 million per year over the next 5 years. And this would clearly demonstrate our sincerity and our belief in the survival of the small business individuals.
The Prime Minister adds that this year alone, as a result of the pandemic, they are providing $55 million for small businesses.
A broad, sustained recovery requires Bahamian business people to have the funding required to create jobs. We need our Bahamian entrepreneurs to have money to create new businesses or to expand existing ones. With entrepreneurships, Mr. Speaker, comes risk. Not every idea we lend to will work, but some will. And the successes of these Bahamian entrepreneurs.
Now, Shadow Minister for Finance Chester Cooper's voicing concerns of the ERC's executive summary of its report tabled in the House of Assembly yesterday. He says it's unfortunate that it took the crippling of the global economy through a worldwide pandemic for the Prime Minister to assemble a committee of professionals to recommend how to drive our economy forward. But here we are, he says. Mr. Cooper adds the opposition planned to dissect it in detail, but there was not much new or revolutionary information reported by the Prime Minister. He says he stated the obvious while spouting off a wish list of many things the public has heard before. Mr. Cooper says an actual sound plan is specific, measurable, achievable, and result-oriented with a timeline. He adds that we were given no details on when and how this wish list will be implemented, and we will now have to wait until next month to hear which recommendations this administration supports and will action. He says the opposition acknowledges and thanks the volunteers for their work. Mr. Cooper adds that it's heartening to hear the government has listened and accepted his recommendation to expedite the approval process of foreign direct investment and also the investment of $250 million to support entrepreneurs. But he says he recommended these things in 2017 and has repeated them numerous times thereafter, to which each time the other side laughed. He says the stark reality is that we cannot fix the economy until we get COVID-19 under control in the Bahamas. To realize this, he said, you need to look no further than the fact that Sandals is open across the Caribbean, but not in the Bahamas. He adds that the country is failing in the COVID-19 fight and its tourism partners have noticed. He says had the Prime Minister taken the advice the Progressive Liberal Party offered 3 years ago and repeatedly since, and assembled a similar collection of professionals with a view to implementing the roadmap laid out in the National Development Plan, we would have been able to pivot and recover more quickly. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.